Hey, Judy. Hi, Christy. Hello, hello. Hi,
Hello.
Kyla. Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Pretty good.
I think it's been going great.
Yeah.
The sessions I've been in are amazing. I'm so excited.
Leah, they recommend pausing the recording.
You who are attending with us today in this session, both live right now and those of you who are joining us by recording after the fact. We appreciate you spending this time with us to learn a little bit about the work of 3 different organizations in Texas doing work cross-institutionally to advance open educational resources. As Leah said, my name is Christy Park. I am the Executive Director of the Texas Digital Library, one of the co-organizing institutions of Open Texas 2021. And I'm going to start today with a caveat, which is a great way to start a presentation, about the title of this presentation, which purports to lay out the state of OER in Texas. As though that's represented completely by the 3 institutions or organizations represented in this session. I want to emphasize that we are far from representing the entirety of what constitutes the state of OER in Texas, and not even the only 3 organizations working cross-institutionally to advance aspects of this work. We're statewide. There's the state library, there's the university systems, the Houston area OER consortium, and other regional consortia doing this work. So I just want to start there with a recognition that the state of OER encompasses all of us, really. And one of the great gifts of this conference for me has been the ability to see that breadth and depth of efforts happening all across the state. And I want to thank all of you for that. Next slide. With that said, I'll begin with a little bit of background about the TDL. We are probably the smallest organization represented here, and you may not know us. So our mission is expressed in the statement on this slide. We are a collaborative consortium that exists to build capacity among our membership for ensuring equitable access to and preservation of digital content that is of value to research, instruction, cultural heritage, and institutional memory. We're comprised of 25 member institutions, most of them, though not all, 4-year academic libraries. We do have growing constituencies of community college and public libraries that are part of TDL as well. Those libraries pool resources in us to host a number of different technology services, including hosted digital repositories that provide support for collecting and providing access to digital materials. And we are almost entirely member funded, certainly member governed, and therefore driven directly by our members' needs. So I note this in part because it impacts both our sort of how we work as a quote unquote statewide organization, and it impacts our approach to our work and is somewhat distinct from the organizations and agency represented by my colleagues who will follow me. All of our work, all of it, is centered on an ethos of openness. We are builders and users of open source technologies and open infrastructure, and our existence, our history, our coming into existence is rooted in the open access movement. That is the movement to make scholarship, research data, the artifacts of research and scholarship openly and freely available online. So the open education movement is a natural analog to that work and aligns closely with our historical and current missions. Along with the technology-based work that we do, hosting repositories and other services, We also strive to serve as a center for excellence and to develop, to varying degrees of formality, communities of practice for librarians and archivists and library and archives workers of all kinds who are engaged in this work of providing access to digital materials. So a big part of our work as a consortium is in managing and supporting the communities of library and archives workers within our membership to do their work. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are member driven, and as our member libraries became engaged with the open education movement over the past several years, driven, particularly since the advent of SB 810, which was a big driver for, I think, all of us statewide, we began to investigate ways that we could provide support in this area. And knowing that libraries are at many institutions leaders in terms of advocacy and consultation on the use of open educational resources. So in terms of TDL's role in supporting open ed, as a kind of thesis statement, I'll say that at this point in time, our work is focused on building the expertise and professional skills and capacity necessary to advance the use of OERs from within the academic library context, supported by our existing repository infrastructure. And before I move into speaking about some of the more programmatic aspects of that capacity building work, I want to talk just for a moment about our approach generally and some of the more difficult to quantify aspects of the work that we do. We at TDL are big believers in collaboration. We look for areas where we can work with others, where we can work across organizations to promote more connections, more and better communication across this vast and, at times fractured Texas higher education community and landscape. This is work that has included, of course, like coordination with the DigiTex and the coordinating board to put on this conference. But we do this in smaller, more informal ways as just part of the way that we do business. For instance, inviting the coordinating board to present to our membership about the OER text repository, which I know Kyla is going to talk about later on. We view this kind of collegial coordination as a really important piece of the value that we provide to our members and to the broader higher education ecosystem here in the state. Before I advance to the next slide, I want to just call your attention to the link here, which will take you to a kind of broad overview about the suite of services that I'm going to talk about, and also give a quick shout out to the amazing Leah DeForest, who's moderating this session, who serves as our OER services manager at TDL, one of the hats that she wears. Next slide, please. Okay, so the centerpiece of our efforts to support OER initiatives is a consortial membership in the Open Education Network, which used to be the Open Textbook Network. You may know it under that name. OEN is a nationwide organization building a community of practice that manages a set of shared resources, including shared data dashboards, shared instructional resources, an open textbook library, and provides professional development opportunities and publishing services, all with the goal of transforming higher education and making open the default. So all of our members have access to the benefits of OEN through their membership in TDL, at no additional cost to them, which saves them the cost themselves of an institutional membership. And it provides them with access to, among other things, regional workshops that OEN leads for us, which are geared towards equipping OER champions to be local leaders and advocates for OERs at their campuses, and provides a framework for implementing faculty incentive programs to engage with open textbooks. It also gives them access to training in textbook publishing services and gives us the ability to track our efforts consortially through the OEN data dashboard. It also lets our members pay just a little extra to be affiliates of OEN, where they get more direct institutional benefits to the Open Education Network. So we launched this membership with our members late in 2019. And since then, we've held 2 regional workshops, partially interrupted by the pandemic. We held one in-person workshop in March, I believe the week that everything shut down. And since then have held one virtually and have a third scheduled for April. And we've offered free Pub 101 training through OEN to help libraries develop open textbook publishing programs. Next slide, please. The membership has also afforded us the opportunity to begin building that community of practice, that kind of center of expertise and center of excellence as a resource for our members. So as part of this membership, we held a competitive application process through which we selected 7 consortium OER leaders who have received special access to some intensive training through the week-long OEN Summer Institute, which was held virtually this past summer, and we're crossing our fingers will be held in person at some point in the future. We call these 7 leaders who are pictured on this slide our OER ambassadors, and they've committed to serve with us for a minimum of 2 years to develop a community of practice around OER and to serve as a source of expertise on OER for all consortium members. And they include representatives from 7 different institutions: A&M Corpus Christi, Texas Tech, Texas Women's University, UT Austin, UT San Antonio, and West Texas A&M. And this is just a phenomenal group of OER experts that are building programs within our consortium to support our member libraries. They are still in relatively early days, but they have already been and will continue to be a great resource to our consortium and the wider Texas academic library community as they, develop shared resources for TDL members and coordinate our communities in creative and innovative ways to advance OER use and library leadership in this space. Next slides. And finally, I'll briefly note that while we don't host any OER specific technology currently, many of our members do use our hosted open access digital repositories to house collections of open educational resources. And you can see some of those collections on this slide. These repositories provide a way, especially before the existence of OER text, to collect and provide access under open licenses to teaching materials that were created or adapted by faculty members at their institutions for others to use. Next slide. All right, I'll wrap up by noting a few upcoming events and ways that members and non-members alike can stay involved and engaged with TDL's work. Our next OEN workshop will be held virtually on April 9th for our members, and our TDL OER ambassadors are hosting quarterly meetings. The next one is June 2nd, which provide a forum for open discussion among our members and information sharing around OER topics. In between there, TDL will host its annual conference, the Texas Conference on Digital Libraries. That will be held virtually from May 24th to 27th, and I invite all of you to join us for that low-cost event. I'm going to put a link to information about that in chat when I'm done speaking. And finally, we manage a Google group for anybody, completely open, in higher ed interested in OER issues And I invite all of you to sign up for that group and join the discussion there. It's a great place to ask questions, engage in discussion, post announcements or news. And we hope all of you will join it. I'm going to post a link to chat to that as well. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Judith Sebesta from DigiTex, and we'll be back at the conclusion to answer questions. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate it. I'm Judith Sebesta, the Executive Director of the Digital Higher Education Consortium of Texas, as Leah and Christy pointed out, also known as DigiTex. And DigiTex primarily supports all 50 public community college districts in Texas. I say primarily because a lot of the work that we do, including our support of OER, certainly goes beyond the bounds of the 50 public community college districts. We also facilitate interinstitutional course sharing across our member colleges, and we engage in research on digital education and lead the Texas Quality Matters Consortium. But the main reason we're here today is because we do support a variety of OER initiatives at our member institutions and beyond. And today I really want to focus on two of our most current initiatives I'm very excited about right now. Next slide, Leah. I will be sure after my talk to put links in the chat to several things that I'll be talking about, but I'll also note that Leah had created a really wonderful handout that includes links to pretty much everything all three of us are talking about today. And I believe that handout is available under session details within the conference website. So I'm very pleased to announce that we have recently begun work on the next iteration of our Texas OER survey and landscape analysis. This, since 2019, the first iteration, has been a joint project among DigiTex, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the National Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management in Education. This is a survey on OER programs, policies, and practices at 2- and 4-year public and private nonprofit institutions in Texas. I'll be sure and put a link to the 2019 report in the chat box when I finish, so that you can see that we surveyed, we got responses from 100 institutions in that survey. And those responses back in 2019 painted a picture of a growing commitment to OER. And I think that the variety of initiatives that we're discussing today and others certainly really do support that picture of growing commitment to OER. And it's very exciting, I think, within our state right now. So the 2021 survey is going to open soon, potentially today, so stay tuned. And using the baseline data from the 2019 survey, we, along with our partner organizations, have created new and revised questions regarding things like graduate programs in OER, the use of OER texts, participation in statewide OER initiatives, challenges regarding things like OER course marking, collaboration and infrastructure, and some others. The 2021 survey will be sent very soon by the coordinating board, likely next week, to all the CAOs and the CIOs at public institutions of higher education across Texas. We'll also be sending to ICUT so that we can be sure and get the participation of the independent colleges across Texas. And new for the 2021 surveys that we also will be including HRIs, health-related institutions, as well within the survey. So look for that soon. The target date, and the deadline, right now we're hoping that the deadline we're setting is going to be April 2nd for that survey to be submitted. The target date for the final report completion is September 20th, 2021, to be available via the new Coordinating Board State Digital Learning Clearinghouse. And it will include comparative analysis of the 2021 data with that baseline 2019 data. Next slide, Leah. Thank you. So the other initiative that we're currently working on and very excited about is the new DigiTex OER Development Small Grant Program. So the eligibility are faculty members, full or part-time at any public Texas community college, and they may apply individually or as a team to include another faculty member, an instructional designer, and or a librarian. The focus here is on creation Oh, thank you, Lee. It's on creation and or adaptation of resources to support courses in the Workforce Education Course Manual. And STEM courses will be given priority, although we will consider other courses that are included in the WECM. We'll be awarding up to $20,000 total in grants. Those grants will range, as you see on the slide, from $500 to $2,000. And instead of incentivizing the creation of full courses or full textbooks even, what we are trying to incentivize is the creation of smaller bits and bytes of OER to include things like modules, online homework, lab manuals, assessment, or other support materials for courses. Requirements for those who are awarded the grants include completion of Texas Learn OER, our open 10-module OER training, which the primary author, Carrie Gitz, and I will be talking about at 2:45 if you want to join us at that session and learn more. We'll also be talking about the latest outcomes for Texas Learn OER. The grantees will also be required to obtain the services of a peer reviewer for their resource or resources, and that peer reviewer will be compensated. And they must submit the resource or resources that are developed to the OER text repository. And the deadline, as you can see here, is coming up March 31st. I will put a link to the RFA in chat once I'm done, and we always encourage you to contact us if you have any questions about the RFA or about the grant program in general. And at the end of this talk, you'll see our contact info in the last slide. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over now to Kyla. Dr. Torrey.
Thank you so much, Judith. So hi, everybody. I'm Kyla Torrey. I'm the program director in digital learning at the coordinating board. For those of you, I guess, who are out of state, the coordinating board is the state agency that sort of leads and supports the institutions of higher education in Texas. So I'm really happy to be here at Open Texas. I think this is a really important step to showcase all of the OER work that's being done everywhere in Texas. I've been working on OER projects at the state level basically since I started at the coordinating board. And I have to say that there's nowhere else that I would rather be on a Friday afternoon than talking to the Texas OER community. So glad to be here. I guess let's move on to the next slide. So before I get into OER specific initiatives, I want to introduce the new division of digital learning at the coordinating board. So this division was launched in November of 2020, just a couple of months ago, and it encompasses OER work at the coordinating board, both current and future, as well as other digital learning work. Dr. Michelle Singh is our new Assistant Commissioner of Digital Learning. She spoke before Dr. Pollard's keynote yesterday, so you might have seen her. She talked about the importance of looking past cost savings as the reason for doing OER work to embrace creativity and innovation and pedagogy that OER allows. So the Division of Digital Learning, we really seek to spread awareness, build capacity, and recognize excellence in the realm of digital learning and OER. And I'll talk a little bit about our vision next. We can move on to the next slide, please. So the Digital Learning in Texas, or DLTX as we're calling it, vision encompasses all facets of work at institutions in the state and beyond. So we're basing our work on past research like the OER landscape survey that Judith mentioned, and also on some future research projects that we'll be doing, as well as input from our Learning Technology Advisory Committee, LTAC, and institutional and organizational partners that I'll talk about, as well as conversations with all of you. And we aim to touch every aspect of digital learning in Texas. So in digital learning in Texas, we say we educate, which is the faculty portion, we learn, which is our learners portion, we drive, which is the institutional portion, we innovate, research, we advocate for policy, and we lead the horizon of digital learning in Texas and across the country, hopefully. And OER work is really an important piece of this DLTX vision. So I'm going to start by talking about current OER initiatives at the agency. We can go on to the next slide, please. This is a very broad overview, and then I'm going to talk about each in more detail. So you see we have grants on a couple of different levels. We have the OER text repository and community, and then we have partnerships with a number of different institutions and organizations, and I'll talk about what we're doing with all of those. So I'm going to start by talking about our state-funded grants, since those were sort of the first work in OER that we did. We can move on to the next slide, please. So Senate Bill 810, which came out of the 2017 session, as I'm sure most or all of you know, set up a state-funded OER grant program. We were allocated additional funding in the 2019 session. And so in 2018, we gave our first round of grants. We awarded $152,000. And what we're seeing out of that is immense return. Over $300,000 was saved by students in the very first semester of implementation of that grant program. And we expect to see more moving forward as we collect more data. That's just with 15 grants in that first round to faculty in order to adopt, adapt, or create OER to build Texas core curriculum courses. In 2020, we awarded 20 additional grants. Those are a little bit different. We broke them into development grants for creating new OER and implementation grants for adapting existing OER. And we're looking forward, of course, to seeing if the legislature will allocate additional funding to this grant program moving forward. And we certainly hope so. And we can move on to GEAR grants. So the federal government awarded, through the CARES Act, a lot of federal funding to higher education, and $175 million of that, which was in our Texas Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, came to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. So the vast majority of that $175 million is going towards direct student support, but some is being used for online learning support, and that includes OER grants. So this slide describes the two different types of OER grants that we had under the program. We have development for creating new OER and implementation for adapting existing OER. And this program, we opened up a little bit from Texas core curriculum to include co-requisite and also workforce education courses. So the application for this grant program, as it is, ended in January, and the awardees will be announced very soon. We may open additional GEAR-funded course grants later on. This is currently under consideration, so keep an eye out for that. And next, we'll talk about the OER text repository. So the OER text repository came from a state allocation. It was launched just this past September 2020. In partnership with ISKME, the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education, who are the creators of OER Commons. So OER text is really a repository of materials. You know, it's a library of OER, but it's also a space for collaboration and community. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can become part of the OER text community. And Leah, if I can ask you to put the link in chat. And then it'll also be at the end of the presentation. We can put it in again. Okay, next slide, please. We are inviting you to become part of the OER text community. We really think it's important, and it's our goal to make OER text part of the culture of OER use and collaborative work in Texas. Next slide, please. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of things. We have institutions who are already starting hubs on the site, so you can sort of own a piece of OER text where you develop collections and groups and things that make sense to your institution. So that's one way of joining the OER text community. You can certainly go and adopt the OER that's there, adapt it as you see fit for your courses. You can select OER from different collections that we have there. We have topic-based collections as well as collections from Texas institutions. And you can suggest collections if you think there are topics or your institution has OER that you want to share. Please upload it, share it, and suggest a collection to us. The OER text can be integrated within your learning management system. If your institution is interested in that, you can reach out to me. You can also create OER within the site. There are authoring tools, or you can upload links to OER that's housed elsewhere. You can apply for one of the grants that I'll talk about in a moment. And you can collaborate by creating a group or suggesting a hub or joining one of the webinars that we will have, which I will also talk about in a moment. We can move on to the next slide, please. So we're partnering with several institutions and organizations for the work we're doing currently and also for future OER work. So I'm going to talk about those next. Certainly I'm in the room with two of them, so that's exciting. It's nice to be it's nice to be partnering to put on this conference. Next slide, please. So the three institutions at the top, Dallas College, the Dana Center at the University of Texas at Austin, and OpenStax out of Rice University are our technical assistance partners. They are going to be providing support for the GEAR funded grantees and also work with us on some projects on the horizon. Of course, Judith mentioned the second iteration of the landscape survey, which we're very excited about. And then we created OER text with ISKME, and we will be working with them on an upcoming OER Core Elements Academy. So let's talk about what's coming up on the horizon. We can move on to the next slide, please. So moving forward, we have a lot of plans for OER and for digital learning initiatives more broadly, based on what we're learning from things like the OER landscape survey and other research, from LTAC, from our partners, from conversations with the field. So these are some of the directions that we're headed in. One is OER framework support. So we saw from the landscape survey and our experiences that the need for understanding of OER and the need to build capacity to sustain OER work at institutions is important. So we're planning to provide financial support and curriculum for creating OER frameworks at institutions. This will include using existing OER to build a Texas OER playbook that can be adapted for different levels, like institutional level, department level. And it will guide OER implementation on campuses or in your department, whatever level you're choosing. OER capacity building support is also on the horizon. We want to meet institutions where they are to build and scale the OER work that's being done. So this will include building capacity not just for faculty, but also for digital learning specialists, librarian, faculty excellence centers, and other supports at the institutions. We're going to hold what we're calling tentatively OER Text Fest with OpenStax as a partner. We'll be holding a Texas OER Creator Fest, and that's a virtual event where participants can workshop OER projects and learn from peers. So look for that coming up in the fall, tentatively. We will be having an OER Core Elements Academy with ISKME, which will be a series of 3 workshops on OER foundations. This will be presented in a cohort model and can result in certification. So look for that in the summer of 2020. And lastly, looking a little bit more broadly, we are planning to offer a digital learning summit to bring together the digital learning community in Texas and beyond, and this will include OER as a focus. So we hope this will be an opportunity to hear success stories and learn about best practices in innovative pedagogy. I think the last slide is just contact information and also the link for the OER text repository, the email for the OER text GEAR grant program, and my personal email. You're welcome to reach out with any questions or comments or suggestions. I welcome them, and yeah, so that we'll, I guess, talk about questions now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kyla and Judith and Christy. So everyone, you're welcome to unmute your video and show your faces. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the slides now. We'll share all the information that you see on the screen here in our handout. So for Q&A, please feel free to unmute your videos and say hello. I did see a couple of questions in chat that we'll get to in just a minute. And if you want, you might enjoy watching the conversation in the gallery view rather than speaker view, so you can see everybody at once. Well, I just want to thank you all again for such wonderful presentations, and also just thank everyone for attending today, especially for your work and advocacy for your students and helping students be their best selves. I'm going to start going through chat and looking at questions. Some nice positive feedback for the DigiTex grants. That's great. Here's a question from Esther, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. What is the reason for the GEAR grants? I guess this is a question for Kyla. What is the reason for the GEAR grants having a matching requirement?
That's a good question. Basically, the reason for the matching requirement is to make sure that the institution is supportive of the faculty members that are involved in the project. We did have a matching requirement for the last state grant and for the GEAR course grants. So that's we're looking at it going forward and seeing if it fulfilled the expectations that we had for it. So.
Makes sense. Gotta put your money where your mouth is for those institutions to share in the cost. Here's a question from Kenneth. What kind of timeline is involved in the OER Text Fest and the Digital Learning Summit? So we're already excited about your events, Kyla.
Yay. OER Text Fest tentatively in the fall, this fall. So we're beginning the planning of that. The Digital Learning Summit will be farther out. I don't really have a timeline on that quite yet. And then the Core Elements Academy, yes, will be in this summer. We're looking at starting in May.
Great, and here's a follow-up question there. The Core Elements Academy in summer 2021, is that when the timeline for that this summer? Great. And another related question, is there an application process for these upcoming trainings, or will they be available for all?
Not an application process per se. We're probably going to cap the number of attendees for the cohort just to make it manageable, and we'll ask that people sort of self-select based on whether or not they can attend all of the trainings and do the sort of workshopping that comes in between. There will be assignments and things, so if you can commit to it, that would be helpful.
So some chatter on chat about the matching requirements still, and Wendy notes that it's a shame about matching since, especially due to the pandemic, there's a lot of financial stressors, and I think everyone can relate to that. And I would invite anyone on the call here who might also have applied for a grant, some of your strategies for finding that money. I know a lot of folks, especially the librarians that we work with at TDL, have used in-kind support. But if anyone else has any strategies for the matching funds, I think that'd be really helpful to share out. Nathan also mentioned that as someone who has implemented the OER program on his campus, it was actually helpful because it helped him create a budget to begin with. So I can relate to that too. Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea really, is to promote sustainability of the projects. So.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna jump back to, I just mentioned libraries, and so I am going to jump back to our first speaker, Christy, and I do have a question for you regarding the library's role in OER. And we at Texas Digital Library work with librarians and archivists, and we've seen that librarians are sort of the frontline boots on the ground people who are bringing campus partners together. And I just wanted to see, Christy, if there was any ideas you had for how librarians can find more campus support for OER.
That's a great question. And like you say, I think one of the things we find is that at many institutions, I think this is possibly more true at four-year institutions than community colleges. The academic library is often one of the leading, the vanguard for OER support on their campuses in many cases. But they're also, I think all libraries are struggling with capacity for doing this work and scaling this work. Many of our organizations have, a half-time person or, maybe one person who's really focused on this. And the library side of things can be very labor intensive. It's a lot of sort of consultation one-on-one with faculty members. So I think those partnerships are essential with, instructional design and digital learning units on campus and academic units on campus. And actually, I think one of the ways I would answer this question is by saying how encouraged I am that there is so much effort and leadership coming from the coordinating board, especially in the last year or so, to start building this capacity and this work across institutions and across the whole institution. But in terms of libraries specifically, I think we have some models for that throughout our organization, where libraries are partnering directly with academic units to talk about what courses can we convert to open textbooks. And let's do a pilot project and see, assess it and see how it works, if we can transform courses. And then that can build support for across the institution for other transformations.
Agreed. And for the librarians who are here, I am going to give you a shout out, and anyone who needs help with OER on your campus, go see your librarians. They're going to be the best people to help you out right now. So we have a couple of questions around, we talked quite a bit about some of the professional development opportunities that Kyla's team at the Higher Ed Coordinating Board is providing. Judy, would you mind letting us know what kind of statewide professional development opportunities are there that DigiTex is providing, and specifically to community colleges?
Why, Leah, I'm so glad you asked. I did mention the professional development opportunity that we provide, not just community colleges, but because it's an openly licensed training, it's available to anyone. And that is our Texas Learn OER. Let me just pop that URL here again into the chat for you. So this is co-authored, this is authored primarily by Carrie Gitz at Austin Community College. She created ACC Learn OER a few years ago as a part of her Spark Leadership, OER Leadership Grant Fellowship Program. I don't think I have the exact title, but anyway, it was her capstone project, and I happened to be one of the peer reviewers for that. And as a result of the 2019 statewide OER survey, one of the findings or the recommendations in that was to develop and provide more trainings for faculty and others on OER. So I kind of put two and two together and thought, wow, why don't we contract with Carrie Gitz, who's amazing. If she's here, Carrie, kudos to you, and see if we could develop that for a statewide audience. And because it's openly licensed, it can be adapted to local contexts in Texas and even beyond. And Rice University here in Texas is one institution that has adapted it for their university. It's called Rice Learn OER. And so kudos to you, Rice, if anybody hears from there. But it's 10 modules, and it's really kind of an OER 101 training, I would say, but it includes some pretty in-depth information about Texas. And Carrie and DigiTex's Associate Director, Ursula Pike, and I are just beginning work on Texas Learn OER 2.0. So again, if you'd like to hear more, Carrie and I are leading a session at 2:45, and we'll talk a little bit about the current outcomes for that training too. Thanks, Leah, I'm glad you asked.
Thanks so much, Judith. And yeah, I'll second that. Carrie Getz is fabulous. So Carrie, you've got fans. I did want to point out, if we have lots of time left, so please make sure to type your questions for our presenters in chat, and we'll get to them first come, first serve. Kyla, coming back to you, what do you see on the horizon for OER? And I know we look to the coordinating board as sort of the crystal ball to the legislation that might be in progress or on deck, and just wanted to see what kind of initiatives you see coming up.
Sure. So I think, at the coordinating board and with our new division, I think it's really going to be about collaboration with and growth of the OER community in Texas, building up OER text so that there's more resources there, and also so that it's being used for collaboration and communication. We're excited about the survey, and we're excited about that informing some future endeavors. And then we're really gonna connect our OER work to our broader picture and our broader vision for digital learning as well. And we're, as someone mentioned, we're creating a digital learning clearinghouse, which will include data and best practices and all sorts of things related to digital learning, including resources for OER. So look forward to that. As far as legislation goes, I haven't seen anything sort of directly related to OER yet. There are a couple of bills about automatic charges for instructional materials going on right now. HB 1707 and HB 1027, I believe, and they are similar bills, although there are some differences. So they talk about student data sharing and how those different charges are decided if institutions are going to enter into agreements for automatic charges and that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily directly related to OER, but I think it is related to the broader picture of affordable learning materials.
You know, and if I could follow up on I've been following that legislation, both of those bills a little bit myself, Kyla, and you know, I think I really appreciate that these legislators are attempting to protect student rights in some very, very significant ways. And I think it's 1231 SB 1707 HB that actually, I believe it's that one that has something in it that requires a student vote on some of these things to protect their rights and transparency in relation to opting in, opting out, cost of instructional materials. There's a variety of conditions in them that I just think are very laudable to protect student rights in these regards. I'm glad you brought those up, Kyla.
Thanks, Judith. And Christy, I wanted to ask you, what do you see for Texas Digital Library and OER work in the future?
Well, I think that we're at the start of some things, right? It's similarly to, you know, OER texts and some other things, the digital learning Texas work that Kyle is talking about. We're right at the start of this capacity building exercise with the Open Education Network. So I'm excited to see where that goes and what that community develops for our membership specifically and for the broader Texas academic library community. I think just thinking about the horizon and where we are now, it seems like there's so much work going on across the state at institutions and collaboratively across institutions at the coordinating board at DigiTex. And the seeds have been planted, and I'm excited to see how we kind of scale up these efforts statewide. And so I think that's what's next for Texas, is if I think about the horizon, is scaling up, programmatizing, making sure, provosts and presidents and administrations are supporting and on board with these efforts at their institutions. I'm really excited about, that happening. And I see that kind of building right now.
Kyla, I've got a question for you in chat here. How are the coordinating board's OER initiatives supporting or enhancing other coordinating board goals, such as 30 by 60?
Well, that's a good question. I think we see this in a couple different ways, and so we're actually in the process of renewing 60 by 30 text, I guess is the best word to use. We're looking at it, we're adding to it, thinking about it more, and the commissioner has been involved in a lot of regional conversations doing that. But I think, most sort of obviously, I guess, is the affordability goal of 60 by 30 text, keeping education affordable. But I also think arguably the completion goals of 60 by 30 text can be better met with OER and the lower cost of instructional materials and having the instructional materials first day and access to them. So I think OER really does fit into our larger vision as an agency, and certainly I think just the creation of the vision of digital learning and OER being a part of that is testament to how important we think it is. So.
Thanks, Kyla. I had a question come in through a direct message, and this is really for any of the panelists here. But are there particular disciplines that institutions should be paying attention to when we talk about scaling up? Are we talking about targeting some of the large core courses or certain departments? I just would like to hear what y'all have to say about that.
Well, I think the big core courses are where there's been a lot of engagement already. And those resources exist by and large. I'm sure, there are gaps. I would say that, I think there is more adoption to be advocated for and pressed on for a lot of institutions on those big core courses. But I would also say scaling up involves, moving beyond those large courses at institutions, thinking about, sophomore and junior level courses, but that still have a broad reach across institutions, across the state. I don't know about disciplines. I know there are disciplinary gaps that we need to fill. But when I think of scaling up, I'm thinking about more, but also, we need to go broader in terms of discipline and the number of students who take any particular course or need a particular textbook. Looks like Judith.
Christy, that's so well said. And we've been doing some research on this, and there's a significant dearth of OER in some of the highest enrollment fields in Texas for credentials and degrees. Those include things like welding technology. That's one of the highest enrollment disciplines with very good ROI in terms of job, ability to obtain a job in that field. Health professions. I think probably, even if we're not in any discipline of the health professions, we're probably aware that those can be incredibly expensive textbooks and resources. And they are some of the highest, from nursing to others, some of the highest enrollment fields in Texas. Business as well, although I think we're seeing some inroads into business, but I've heard from several folks at this conference who are in the fields of business and are happily seem to be interested in developing OER and furthering that work. So I think, you know, that was kind of the lowest hanging fruit initially, were the high enrollments within the core courses. And certainly we want to continue to develop those and make those available to students. But particularly those high enrollment disciplines, automotive technology is another as well. So I'm mentioning, as you can tell, some of the workforce credentials, but also in some, you know, any of the STEM fields, I think we've really got to be focusing on to provide OER for students, all the way up to, you know, medical school, because that can be a significant barrier for students, underserved students, particularly entering into medical school, or the cost of the educational resources.
Absolutely. And I heard a phenomenal presentation in this conference yesterday about the University of Houston, from University of Houston Medical School folks using open resources for that reason. So
they're the newest medical college in Texas, and they're already baking in OER into their curriculum. I say that's fantastic. Kyla, it looked like you were going to say something. I'm glad you brought that up,
I
Chris.
think that's great. And I hope you add those resources to OER text, please. Yeah, so we can all benefit from them. So we have, of course, been expanding to workforce courses a bit. We think there's a need in that area. But I really would like to turn this question back on you all, so that we know where you're seeing gaps as you're trying to implement OER in your courses. It's important information for us as we're moving forward to implement grant programs and things. So please, if you have ideas about, when I saw that, I think it was Bruce put in those gateway courses, which is a great idea. Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes left, a little over, and please keep those questions coming. It's great to see you all being so active in chat. And I know you all have really good ideas to share, so this is a great place to share them.
Look, I noticed that Bruce mentioned that at Texas A&M, the largest gap is in engineering. I suspect that's not limited to Texas A&M, Bruce. I'm glad you brought that up. And talk about a high impact career. We've got to make sure that particularly our underserved students can gain entrance to engineering.
Deanne Ivy mentions ancillaries from core classes being a big need, ancillaries for core classes. I think we see that a lot too, to be competitive with commercial textbooks and publishers. I'm also seeing nursing is the biggest gap at Stephen F.
Yeah, this is something that we're looking into, partnering with other organizations across the country to sort of determine where these gaps are nationally and try to fill them. But we're in the sort of beginning stages of thinking about that. So I think that's one of our challenges moving forward. And, you know, how to best support the institutions and build the infrastructure on campuses and provide those sorts of resources is really what we're looking at doing. So we love conversations like this one, where we can get information from you all, but also reach out and let us know.
You know, I noticed that Ruth mentioned first day access, you know, a term that often is lumped in with inclusive access, but I prefer first day access myself as well, because I think it's a little more honest about what we're talking about with those commercial resources. But that, you know, I don't blame any institution for looking at a variety of ways, of means, of methods through which they can ensure that college and university courses are affordable for students. But one challenge that I've heard a number of times from our colleges is, the question is kind of put to me like this. I'm the OER advocate on my college, but our college is going all in with first day access or inclusive access. How do I continue to advocate for OER? And one of the things that I urge them to do is to help educate folks that OER are not just about affordability, they're also about the open licenses, the freedom and the ability to engage in practices that can support better learning outcomes, more student engagement and creativity, and revitalize instruction. And so, you know, if anyone else is dealing with that challenge, I would urge you to, because those first day access materials or inclusive access don't have licenses that allow you to engage in the full benefits of open educational resources. Christy?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I'm glad you brought that up. I was just thinking about a comment Bruce Herbert made earlier in the chat about open education and OER making college not just more affordable and more and higher education more accessible to students, but produce better outcomes for students or allow students to do better. And I think that when I think about the horizon, I mean, this has been on the horizon for a while, but when I think about the horizon, that's part of it too, is it's not just about affordability, but about better education and, you know, the sense that open resources that are under open licenses can be part of a transformation of instruction and pedagogical technique that can be really, really beneficial to students. And I've heard some wonderful presentations again yesterday and today by professors who are incorporating these materials into innovative teaching plans for their students. And it's really inspiring to see that.
And Christy, you know, that connects us back to Dr. Pollard's amazing keynote address and the connections between OER and equity and how OER can support the democratizing of education. That's what open education is about. It's about leveling the playing field to ensure that all students have access to the materials they need and therefore to succeed and gain the credentials that they might need. And OER can help support that.
Amen to that, Judith. We have about 5 minutes left and we have a lot of excellent brains in the room, so let's pick them. If you have any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and hop on your microphone or type them in chat. While you're thinking, I do want to, oh, I'm sorry, Kyla.
By the way, sorry, Leah, I just changed the security feature so now they can unmute themselves. I don't think they were able to before.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, that's why Bruce wasn't talking. Sorry, Bruce. I did want to point out we have a handout. Judith mentioned it earlier. We have a really great handout that has links to the resources that we shared in the slides. And you can find that on the session site and download it there. And I'll find a link and paste it in there now. Here's a question from Gail. Oh, sorry, Kyla, please.
I just wanted to highlight something that Ms. Shell Singh, our new Assistant Commissioner for Digital Learning, put in the chat about the strengthening of the 60 by 30 plan. So the connection to OER specifically, she says, to leverage and accelerate innovation, to ensure all Texans have equal access to tools and resources that promote educational attainment, and prioritizing high value credentials to align with the workforce. So those are sort of some of the directions that we're moving in.
Got 2 questions in chat. First one is from Gail. What is being done on, whoops, bounced me down. What is being done to help the students in health occupations and CTE? I am not familiar with what CTE stands for.
Career and technical education, also known as
okay.
education, yeah.
Okay. What is being done to help those students?
Well, I'll refer us back to the new DigiTex OER Development Small Grant Program, which again, this grant program is not aimed at developing full textbooks or courses, not yet, but to incentivize smaller bites and pieces of courses specifically within CTE, Gail. So that would include things like the health professions or welding technology or automotive technology that I had mentioned, any course that's in the workforce education course manual. So it's, you know, our grants are not a significant amount, but it's going to be, I think, hopefully something that can help prime the pump and that can be built on. And those will be housed within OER Tech. So that's just one thing that DigiTex is attempting to do to help support those students.
Yeah, so we've also expanded our grant opportunities to workforce courses, and I think the health occupations are obviously one of those high value occupations that we'll talk about and that we're talking about for the 60 by 30 plan. So I think it's a direction for us to move in.
Bruce would like suggestions on what kind of data to collect to show the impact of OER programs.
I would like suggestions on that too, Bruce.
Bruce has suggestions for us on what type of it seems like data that show, I mean, I think typically we're talking about cost savings. That's often something that gets collected, but also student success rates. I don't know how specific I can be, but looking at, you know, and I think this is where pilot programs and it can be useful on campuses to kind of create controlled experiments where you can see this is how well students did with traditional textbooks, and this is how well students did in these courses using OER are you know, the most valuable things for us to see and for administrations to see.
So for our state grantees, some of the information that we collect, which is actually required for us to collect in statute, has to do with drop withdrawal rates and grades and, you know, student success. I think those measures are difficult, especially because of COVID and things like that that are happening. It's hard to get a good read from one semester to another, and whether or not grades and drop withdrawal rates have dropped or risen because of other factors other than OER. There's no sort of control for that. So that's been a challenge.
Can I talk? You guys get permission.
Yes.
So we're playing at Texas A&M. We're playing with two ideas in data collection in collaboration with the provost office, who's running the Student Success Initiative. And the idea is this: it's not all students benefit from OERs. Just like it doesn't really matter what textbook you give them. They're going to be fine, whatever the case may be. So when you measure averages in a class, it's very difficult to see any impact. So the one thing we do is we often focus on those students that are often underserved traditionally by Texas A&M's programs, those kids that don't tend to do as well for lots of reasons that are not necessarily theirs. And then the other thing is what we like to watch is we're going to track them through time. Just how many people do they stay in the majors that they've entered in? Are they encouraged? Do they get the support they need when they need it, right? And so on. And their grades have a big influence on that, you know, if they end up on academic probation. But generally, just where do they go? What's their trajectory over time? And you know, while you can't do that in a one semester project, after 2-3 years, you can tell if it's working or not, and you can really see. I believe we're going to see a difference, and we're going to see a difference by focusing on those students that are likely to benefit from OER programs. And then if we can make that case, right? And you know, A&M has not always done well serving all the students of Texas, right? And so if we can do better now and kind of make up for that, that's a big thing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bruce. And somebody in chat wants to know whether you're in a bar or not. It looks like a bar. Great. But I know we
I did pick an Irish pub as my Zoom background.
I know we probably are close to the end of our session, but before I let Leah wrap us up, I did want to just point out a few links in the chat that folks have posted to presentations they've done at this conference about metrics and assessments. So if you are interested in learning more about ways of measuring, those would be good references as well.
Yeah, and thanks so much for sharing these resources. I mentioned in chat, I will grab those links and I'll create a new handout for this session. You'll be able to access that at any time. We'll be able to access our sessions in open water for another 30 days. And so if you didn't get a chance to grab those then, just look back at the session. We are at time, we're over time. So let's golf clap, and thank you so much for presenting today, Judith, Kyla, and Christy. And thank you all for attending. You are so appreciated. As a student who had to drop classes because I couldn't afford the textbook, thank you on behalf of students everywhere who rely on your advocacy and looking out for them.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.